Imagine making a series of decisions that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time, only to wake up decades later and realize you've created your greatest competitor. That's essentially what happened with America and China. From the 1970s through the early 2000s, America made a series of policy choices that, step by step, helped transform China from an isolated communist state into an economic superpower. These weren't malicious decisions. They were choices driven by short-term economic benefits, geopolitical strategy, and genuine optimism about engagement leading to liberalization. But the cumulative effect was stunning. American policies, combined with aggressive Chinese domestic strategy, built the industrial base, supply chain dominance, and technological capabilities that define China's power today. This is the story of how America accidentally built China's superpower. The foundation was laid in 1971 and 72 when President Nixon made his historic opening to China. This wasn't about economics initially. It was pure Cold War strategy, a brilliant diplomatic move to play China off against the Soviet Union. Nixon's secret diplomacy and his famous 1972 visit established a diplomatic thaw that removed major obstacles to trade and investment. At the same time, China was beginning its own transformation. Starting in 1978, Deng Xiaoping launched market-oriented reforms that moved China away from Maoist central planning. Special economic zones were created, foreign investment was welcomed, and export-oriented manufacturing became a national priority. America had opened the door diplomatically just as China was preparing to walk through it economically. Neither side fully grasped where this would lead. The real acceleration came in the 1990s and early 2000s, driven by trade liberalization and corporate offshoring. In 2000 and 2001, the Clinton administration pushed hard for China's accession to the World Trade Organization and granted China permanent normal trade relations. This was framed publicly as pulling China in the right direction, encouraging modernization and political moderation through economic integration. The decision locked China into global trade rules, dramatically lowered tariffs, and made China irresistible for companies wanting to manufacture for global markets. At the same time, American corporations were making their own calculations. China offered low wages, massive scale, and something even more valuable, local governments who would offer enormous tax breaks, cheap land, and lightning-fast approvals. Companies like Apple became the poster child of this transformation. Apple's partnerships with contract manufacturers like Foxconn didn't just build iPhones, they built entire industrial ecosystems. In cities like Shenzhen and Zhangzhou, dense networks of suppliers emerged, developing expertise that now serves industries far beyond consumer electronics. These were profit-driven corporate decisions, not geopolitical strategy, but their aggregate effect was to concentrate manufacturing capacity in China at a scale no one had anticipated.
But it wasn't just factories moving to China. Technology and know-how flowed across the Pacific through multiple channels. Foreign direct investment and joint ventures frequently included technology transfer as part of the deal. Companies licensed their technology and shared managerial practices. Academic exchanges accelerated as Chinese students studied in American universities and returned home with cutting-edge knowledge. And in some cases, export controls were inadequate. Advanced equipment and dual-use technologies made their way to Chinese firms, sometimes legally through normal commerce, sometimes through channels that raised national security concerns. Much of this technology flow happened through ordinary market mechanisms and corporate decisions to share knowledge in exchange for market access. But the cumulative effect was that China acquired not just factories, but the underlying technological capabilities to compete at the frontier. The consequences for American workers were severe. Economists documented what they called the China shock, the surge of Chinese imports that hit U.S. manufacturing communities starting in the 2000s. Their research showed that trade with China caused persistent local employment losses and economic dislocation in manufacturing-dependent regions. These were communities that lost their economic foundation, workers who saw their skills become obsolete, and a political backlash that would reshape American politics. Meanwhile, American consumers enjoyed cheaper goods, and corporations saw higher profits, which complicated the political calculus. But here's the critical point. This wasn't just about American mistakes. China made active strategic choices that were absolutely decisive. Chinese governments deployed aggressive industrial policy, subsidies, targeted technology programs, and massive infrastructure investments. Local governments competed fiercely to host factories, with incentives that made Chinese manufacturing unbeatable. Without China's domestic policies and strategic execution, American openness alone wouldn't have produced this outcome. Other countries invested in China too. Japan, Korea, and the European Union all participated. The lesson isn't that America single-handedly built China, but that short-term policy decisions optimizing for immediate gains can produce long-term strategic vulnerabilities. Past American optimism about engagement leading to political liberalization didn't deliver the expected results. Instead, it delivered rapid Chinese economic modernization without the political reforms many hoped for. The story of how America accidentally helped build China's superpower is ultimately about unintended consequences, about the limits of prediction in complex systems, and about how the decisions we make for good reasons today can reshape the world in ways we never imagined.